So in the last class, we have mentioned about the fermentation process, and there we have talked about two different unit operation. One is not unit operation, two different individual processes. One is wort preparation. Wort preparation means the fermentable sugar solution preparation, and then second one is your fermentation. And in wort preparation, you have multiple stages like the malt you got, that malt should be soaked, and then you have the fermentable content as mash, and then you will add different flavoring agent like hop or liquid adjunct in brew kettle, and there also you will try to seize the uh, activity of different hydrolytic enzymes, and finally you will separate that and aerate that liquid, and that cold wort liquid you will send it to fermenter for fermentation. So,
Sir,
yes.
sir, I just wanted to confirm one thing, sir. The submission date PPTs will be 1 day before major exams, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So your major will start on 5th April. So the submission deadline will be 4th April. Last teaching day is 1st April.
Yes, sir. It is 3rd April, sir. Major is 3rd April.
Okay. Are you sure? No, major will start on 5th April.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay.
Last teaching day is 1st April, and then you have 2-3 buffer days. 2nd and 4th are buffer days, and Sunday is national holiday. So you will get sufficient time. So 4th April would be the deadline. Okay, so we have mentioned about the formation of mass. Now this mashing operation is quite significant because most of the hydrolysis of fermentable sugars as well as proteins are done during mashing operation. मैं क्लास में हूँ, मैं क्लास के बाद आपको कॉल करता हूँ. कौन सा चीज? हाँ, उसका ऑर्डर चला गया ना, तो बना दीजिए. जी जी जी. So in mashing operation, we try to extract most of the fermentable sugar as well as protein. So when you do this mashing operation, you actually need to follow some procedure because the saccharification or the hydrolysis process requires certain amount of temperature as well as maintenance of pH. So pH is actually maintained in the acidic range about 5.5, and mostly lactic acid is used for pH maintenance, and sometimes orthophosphoric acid is also used, and along with lactic acid and orthophosphoric acid, calcium sulfate is used to maintain the pH, and because the calcium sulfate as well as phosphate, they will create a good buffering solution. So, and then you can actually maintain the pH in the range of 5.2 to 5.5. And when you talk about uh, solubilizing the fermentable sugar, then in that grains or malt, you have almost 70% soluble substrate. So it is very easy to extract them in the liquid, but the remaining part, around 80% malt, will actually have a lot of other proteinaceous material and also some insoluble part. Like 58% of malt is actually having insoluble solid, there you need to do this enzymatic reaction to get them solubilized in the liquid. And when you add different adjunct like corn grits or rice grits, they will also get hydrolyzed, and from there you will get almost 90% of the solid which will get hydrolyzed and then come to the liquid phase. And both the processes are actually done at relatively high temperature and a low pH. And when you try to increase the temperature, you have two different options. One is gradual increase, and after gradually increasing the temperature, you keep the temperature at a particular value for a certain period of time, because that temperature would be optimal for certain enzymes. And based on your requirement, you decide what particular temperature should be maintained at the first stage, and then again you raise the temperature to activate a different set of enzymes. So the proteolytic enzymes, they get activated at a relatively low temperature compared to the enzymes which are used for saccharification, like which will work on starch. So starch hydrolysis generally happens at a little bit higher temperature. And when you talk about proteolytic reaction, you will not get complete removal of the higher molecular weight proteins. So you'll still have some higher molecular residual proteins, but substantial amount of protein will get hydrolyzed. And when you have sudden change of temperature, you will actually get formation of different kind of constituents. So the gradual increase, then keep in a particular resting condition, then again increase. So if you do this kind of mashing operation, like you are just maintaining temperature or two different stable temperature during mashing operation, then this kind of mashing operation is called double mash method. So essentially that mashing operation you are doing at two different optimal temperature, and it is very common in America where they try to prepare beer from the barley grains and also use corn grits. So double mash method is followed for getting substantial amount of protein to solubilize, and also the starch to get solubilized in the mash. Now, in the first stage, you raise the temperature 35 degrees centigrade and keep it for almost 1 hour. This particular period where you are keeping this broth or the slurry at a particular temperature is also known as protein rest. So in double mash method, essentially you will be having two protein rest period, one at low temperature and then again at high temperature. And when you raise the temperature to a higher level, there you reduce the protein rest period. So low temperature, you have a little bit longer protein rest period, whereas high temperature in the second mash option, you have relatively low temperature. Now in the second stage, when you try to increase the temperature, there you can get increase of temperature by two ways. I have shown in the earlier diagram that in the mash tab, you also have a cooker where you try to cook the adjunct. So adjunct are actually cooked at a relatively higher temperature because you are trying to get the hydrolysis of the starch, which happens at relatively higher temperature. Now, whatever cooked material you're getting from the adjunct tank or adjunct cooker, that can be added to the mash tab, and mash tab will actually get one particular liquid slurry having relatively higher temperature. So overall temperature of the mixture will also increase. Now, when you try to increase this temperature, you have option to increase the temperature at a rapid rate. If you do that, essentially you will be losing the fermentable sugar, because if you do rapid increase in temperature, like if you try to maintain reach the temperature 68 degrees centigrade from 35 degree, and if you do that in 10 minutes, then you will have increase in dextrin concentration, and dextrin is actually non-fermentable sugar. So essentially yield will reduce because in the oat, the final oat, you will get more amount of dextrin, which will not help to produce ethanol. So if you have rapid increase in temperature, you'll end up by getting dextrin formation, which is not desired because you will get a lot of non-fermentable sugars. Dextrin is actually non-fermentable sugars. Now, if you slowly increase the temperature, like if you just spend 30 minutes to increase the temperature from 35 to 68 degrees centigrade, then you will end up by getting a lot of fermentable sugar, and dextrin content will be very less. Now, you maintain the temperature at 68 degrees centigrade for about 30 minutes, but this time can be determined by just checking the starch content in the mash liquid. So if just simple iodine test you can do, and if you get change in color of iodine, then you will see the finishing of this particular process. So when you get complete hydrolysis of starch, then you again raise the temperature to around 80 degrees centigrade, and then you can call that particular stage as mashing off, like you are just finishing the mashing operation. So in the mashing off stage, essentially you try to have uh, the completion of this hydrolysis, and also get little bit of sterilization, because now after hydrolysis you are actually having a lot of fermentable sugar in this particular broth, and it is very useful for any bacteria, because the bacteria present in the environment, if they get a chance to utilize that sugar, they will grow and they will spoil that entire broth. So that's why you just raise the temperature and do little bit of pasteurization operation to make sure that this particular liquid is not getting contaminated with other bacteria. And during protein rest period, like say at 35 degree you are keeping at 1 hour, or at 68 degree you are keeping at 30 minutes. During that resting period, mostly at low temperature at 35 degrees centigrade, you will have activity of different proteolytic enzymes, and they will work on proteins to just uh, break them to different amino acid, different peptides, peptones, and ammonia. And residual higher molecular proteins will still be there, because when you do this proteolytic operation, you are not going to get complete removal of or complete dissociation of protein. Only a small fraction of protein will get dissociated. Whereas for starch hydrolysis, your intention is to actually hydrolyze entire starch. Whereas for protein lysis or proteolytic activities, there you are not going to get 100% removal of protein or 100% breakdown of protein. Hardly 20% will actually lysed due to this proteolytic enzyme. Remaining almost 80% protein will be there, and they will actually contribute the final taste, stability, and foam formation. So final taste, physical stability, and foam formation will be contributed by this protein. So if you have excess protein lysis, then you will have little foam stability. And if you have very little protein lysis, then you will actually end up by getting cloudy and unstable beer. And when you have this starch hydrolysis, you'll end up by getting mostly different fermentable sugar like glucose, maltose, maltotriose, and maltotetrose also is possible, but that maltotetrose is actually not very easily fermentable sugar. So that will also come under non-fermentable sugar. So maltotriose is fine, but maltotetrose is not good. So glucose, maltose, maltotriose, they're all under fermentable sugar, and you'll also get a lot of non-fermentable dextrin if you have rapid change in temperature. So this fermentable and non-fermentable ratio in the mash actually depends on temperature and time cycle. If you have high temperature and rapid increase in temperature change, then you will get a lot of non-fermentable sugar. If you get gradual increase in temperature, then you will get more fermentable sugar. And during this protein rest period, phytase is another enzyme that will hydrolyze phytin and it will produce that inorganic phosphate. So inorganic phosphate will be helpful in subsequent fermentation process where ammonia obtained from the protein lysis and phosphate obtained from this hydrolysis of phytin will help to grow the yeast cell in fermentation stage. So this is all about your mashing operation. And we have mentioned in earlier class also after getting this mash, you will do put it in brew kettle. There it will get arrested, means the hydrolysis or enzymatic activity will get arrested. And mostly you will have hydrolysis of the sugars and then you will have separation and finally you will cool that and also saturate with air before you send it to the fermenter. Now we'll discuss about fermentation process. And we have already mentioned about hot break, cold break. So along, if you talk about protein related terminologies, then you have during this brew kettle as well as in oat cooler, you get hot break, cold break operation. And in mash tab, where you are doing the mashing operation, there you get protein rest operation. Is it clear? Anybody has any question on this? Okay. Now, in the fermentation process, mostly almost 1 to 2 pound of yeast is used. So 1 to 2 pound of yeast is used per barrel of oat solution. So essentially, you try to get 7 to 15 millions per ml of oat solution. Now, 7 to 15 million yeast solution is actually used for pitching, means for as a seed or inoculum concentration. And if you increase the yeast concentration, then definitely you can reduce the initial lag period. So you can have active fermentation at a faster rate, and fermentation rate will also increase because you are increasing biomass. Because we already mentioned R equal to mu x. So if you just increase x, obviously the rate will also overall rate will increase. Now, um, here in the fermentation period, generally when you add the yeast to the oat solution, you will have agitator or stirrer, mechanical agitator or stirrer, and either you can have glass line vessel or vessel made of specific wood, because this wood material will also just impart certain amount of organic substances in the liquid, so you will get a different kind of taste. So in the fermentation process, the lag period is about 12 hours typically, because the yeast will take some little bit of time to acclimatize, and after 12 hours the yeast cell will populate in 3 to 4 days. So 12 hours is your lag phase, and then log phase will continue for 3 to 4 days. And when you have, because here we are trying to get ethanol, so our intention is to maintain anaerobic condition, because yeast can actually grow in anaerobic as well as aerobic conditions. So if you get aerobic condition, instead of converting carbon to ethanol, C2H5OH, it will convert carbon dioxide. So in anaerobic, respiration, it will try to convert ethanol, but in aerobic condition, it will convert carbon dioxide. But advantage with aerobic condition is, if you really want to have biomass concentration, here also you'll get biomass. Here also you'll get biomass. Now in aerobic condition, the rate is much faster and you can have much higher biomass if you go for aerobic. So typically in the fermenter, generally we don't sparge any nitrogen or any other gases, because the initial stage when you add the inoculum, your intention is to get little bit higher biomass because it will also increase the conversion or reaction rate. So to achieve that, you just add the inoculum and then leave it, because the reactor, whatever oxygen is present in the liquid or in the headspace, that will be utilized by the biomass initially. Obviously, they will also utilize certain amount of carbon, but you will have 3 to 4 fold of increase of biomass concentration at a very short period of time, because in the initial phase it will just produce carbon dioxide and biomass by utilizing oxygen and following the aerobic respiration. And after that, because it is a closed vessel, so after that, when they will completely utilize the carbon oxygen, then automatically the environment become anaerobic and then start producing ethanol. So at the beginning, it will produce a lot of carbon dioxide, and also it will produce uh, some energy, because the aerobic respiration is also exothermic. So at the initial phase, you may not have very difficulty to control the temperature, because large vessel, it will try to dissipate the heat through natural convection. And sometimes to dissipate the heat and also to get better mixing, intermittently you just stir the mixture with the stirrer or agitator. So you mix the liquid intermittently, not in a continuous mode, to just have better transfer of heat as well as mixing of the liquid. So when the carbon dioxide and small bubbles appear on the surface, it will actually form a creamy layer, because the protein obtained from the yeast and also the cell lysis. At the initial phase, the cell lysis will be very minimal, but still you will have some proteinaceous substance in the media, because already wood has proteinaceous material. So protein content, proteinaceous material as well as carbon dioxide, they'll form micelle, and small bubble layer will be formed on the top. And this creamy bubble layer at the top is actually known as Krausen. That is a common terminology used in fermentation industry. And it is very common for Indian industry to see whether you are getting good activity of yeast. So initially, after adding the inoculum, it will start utilizing oxygen, produce certain amount of carbon dioxide, and also the residual or protein present in the system will help them to form the bubbles and micelle, and it will create a creamy layer on the headspace or on the liquid surface called Prausen. Now, when you have more formation of carbon dioxide, they will try to go up, because at the bottom their size will be small. So if you have very tall fermenter at the bottom, because of liquid pressure, you will have very small bubble. Whenever they will go up, the bubble size will also increase, because they will try to coalesce, and then multiple bubble will actually agglomerate, and then you will have a bigger bubble. So this bigger bubble will also try to carry certain amount of yeast. So the yeast will also go to the top and they will also get attached to this foam. So essentially, when you have this kind of separation, you will be losing yeast from the liquid media. To avoid getting that, intermittently you just use the stirrer to make sure that the yeast is again coming back to the liquid media. And when you have very tall fermenter, then agitation is will be more frequent to make sure that the system is not losing too much of yeast. And whenever you have continuous fermentation, like in the initial period, you are having this Clausen formation, and whenever you have continuous formation, means due course of time, oxygen will get depleted, and then it will start producing ethanol, and the foam formation will still be there because carbon dioxide will also form. Carbon dioxide will also be formed, so foam formation will be still be there, but this foam will become more thicker and then will try to precipitate also, because when you have substantial amount of weight, so then it will try to precipitate. And when you start adding hops and other residues, so hops after filtering also, some fine particles of hops could be still there. So whenever they will go up and attach to the foam, overall weight of the foam will increase and they will start precipitating down through the reactor. Now when you do this operation, you just do the fermentation process for say 4 to 5 days, and after 4 to 5 days, CO2 production will decrease, and the foam form on the top will also collapse, and then the yeast will actually try to settle down the reactor. And when you have this process, obviously aerobic respiration will generate more heat. The exothermic reaction will actually generate more heat. Wherever we move towards anaerobic respiration, the heat generation will be less. So automatically the system will try to cool down a little bit when you move towards anaerobic respiration. So this primary fermentation with the help of oxygen will continue maximum for 4 to 5 days. And to complete the interfermentation, considering the anaerobic activity, it will take 10 to 12 days. So initially, so we are talking about 3 to 4 days or maybe maximum 4 to 5 days for primary fermentation. And then secondary fermentation, that is mostly you can say with the help of oxygen, when oxygen is still there. And remaining 10 to 12 days, fermentation for completion or utilization, complete utilization of sugars. So complete utilization of sugar will happen after 10 to 12 days. And still you will still have some multitriose. So sugar means glucose, maltose, they will actually get used up. But the other fermentable sugar like maltotriose, it will be still there, and then yeast will get settled. Now this flocculation of yeast is quite important, because if the flocculation of yeast happens very quickly, that will actually signify that the actual fermentation, that secondary fermentation where you get ethanol production, didn't happen in an efficient manner, because flocculation can only happen if you have a lot of CO2 formation, and a lot of CO2 formation is happening in the primary fermentation. So if you have the yeast are flocculating very quickly, that means it is actually not completed the fermentation. And wherever you have little bit of difficulty of yeast to flocculate, and stay in the suspension for very long period of time, then also it is not desired because the yeast will try to autolyze. So if you suppose you are so less than immediately after 4 to 5 days is also not good because you are not having sufficient amount of fermentation. Similarly, beyond 10 to 12 days is also not good because yeast will stay in the suspension and they will have a tendency to autolyze. And whenever they will autolyze, they will actually impart some undesirable flavor. So undesirable yeast flavor will come if yeast will get autolyzed if you just keep them beyond say 10 to 12 days, and you get yeast flock. Yeast are actually present in as a small flocks in the liquid.
So what is autolysis?
Cell autolysis means it automatically break down.
Okay, so sir, like it will be start dying and
Yes, yes. So
it
when
will
you
go into like a stable phase after logarithmic phase.
yes, so now question is you don't want to have yeast to be floated on the top. That means you are losing a lot of yeast from the system. That happens mostly during the after the primary fermentation. So you need to wait little longer to get this secondary fermentation where things will actually happen in absence of oxygen and will produce ethanol. Now you don't want to keep the yeast in the suspension beyond certain period because yeast will also try to autolyze because of the cell age. And to avoid getting that, you add some polycations because most of the bacteria as well as fungi, they are negatively charged. So if you just add some polycation like calcium, we have mentioned about calcium sulfate. So if you just add some calcium ion, they will actually accelerate or they will help the flocculation process. So at the later stage where the flocculation of small yeast particles in the liquid is not desired, at that stage, if you just add some polycations like calcium, then it will try to facilitate the flock formation. So the flock size will be much bigger and bigger, and then they will settle down. So essentially, to avoid getting autolysis and avoid having a different kind of taste and smell in the beer, you just add little bit of polycations like calcium to facilitate the settling of yeast present in the liquid. And then you do the subsequent process like filtration to remove the uh, component from the like biomasses from the liquid, and then if you go for further processing, like you keep them for longer period for maturation, or you just saturate with carbon dioxide. So different other options processes started after finishing of the fermentation, and then you look for the cosmetics of this particular system, like cosmetics of the process. So you either try to um, age. So when you talk about yeast, beer fermentation, there you have to make sure that the yeast is actually working on fermentable sugar and then producing alcohol. So the fermentable sugar means glucose, maltose, maltotriose. They will all get used up, and then they will produce mm, ethanol. And the non-fermentable sugar, that amount should be as less as possible, and their amount can be controlled by the pre-processing, not in fermenter, because fermenter has no role to yeah, produce this maltotriose or dextrine. So non-fermentable sugar, non-fermentable sugar means even malto, tetra. Sorry, it is malto tetraose. So their concentration, if you have higher concentration of dextrin maltotetraose, then they will not get fermented, but they will impart different kind of taste. And amino acids or ammonia, which obtained from the lysis of protein, they are necessary for yeast nutrition. But again, the ammonia, apart from this lyse protein, you still have a lot of high molecular weight protein, and they will still stay there to just impart certain amount of aroma and flavor in the beer. So amino acid assimilation will also have some relation with this flavor creation and also stability of the beer, and pH as well as composition of the protein in the ore is also quite important factor for this ammonia or amino acid assimilation in the system. So if you have different kind of amino acid composition in present in the ore, which may not be very useful for the yeast, then they will still stay there in the liquid, and that will impart a different kind of color. And during fermentation, different higher alcohols can also be produced, like propanol and isobutanol from amino acids, and sometimes some keto acids are derived from carbohydrate. And this concentration of this higher alcohols as well as keto acids should be kept very minimal, because they will impart different kind of flavor and taste. So from amino acids, you are getting different higher alcohols, and from carbohydrate, you're getting different keto acids, and their concentration and also the higher alcohol like propanol, isobutanol, their concentration should be kept less than 60 ppm. Their concentration should not be more than 60 ppm to avoid getting a different kind of smell in the alcohol. And this aldehydes, they are precursor of alcohol. So when you have formation of alcohol, you can still have formation of aldehyde also, because in acetaldehyde is precursor of ethanol. So similarly, when you try to maintain the quality, you have to make sure that aldehyde concentration is also less than 10 ppm. Mm. So you have to make sure that the organic acids, like different keto acids and other organic acids, should not be very, the concentration of this acid should not be very high, because that will give different kind of taste of the drink. So you can control the concentration of acid by actually regulating the reaction. So the aldehyde concentration should be very minimum. So you have to make sure that you get more conversion of alcohol instead of having aldehyde formation, or having limitation in alcohol formation and then accumulation of aldehyde. So,
So aldehydes are formed by this yeast, or how do we get these aldehydes in this
in TCA,
our fermentation?
in TCA cycle, when you have the oxidation, aldehyde, then alcohol, then acid. So if you feel that aldehyde concentration is more or acid concentration is more, then you have to actually regulate this oxidation process. And this, most of the cases, we are just talking about the chemistry, inside chemistry, but most of the cases, these are not done very minutely, because in thumb rule, they follow a specific time cycle and they get a specific concentration. So they don't try to deviate the process condition, because if you have any deviation in the process condition, you may end up by getting lot of undesired product. So most of the industry, they follow a specific time temperature cycle to avoid getting any contamination problem. But I'm just telling you the different factors which can actually create issues. So if you have really very, suppose instead of 4 to 5 days, you just do the initial primary fermentation for 2 days. So, and then you purge some certain amount of nitrogen or some other gases, and then try to accelerate the secondary fermentation. And in this process, it is very much possible that you may end up by getting some aldehyde, or because if you don't follow this process, the way they follow in different industry, you may actually end up by getting different intermediate, and those intermediate may not be very good for the final product. Now, if you still have option, like if you still, suppose you got some acids. So if you want to get rid of these acids, then you can do further treatment. Or if you get some aldehyde, so you can do further treatment, like you can add certain compound which will remove, or some adsorbent which will remove specifically aldehyde, some adsorbent which will remove specifically acids. So that's why immediately after fermentation, whatever liquid you get, you do all time kind of test to check the concentration of all these intermediates. And if they are coming within satisfactory limit, like if it is concentration is coming less than 60 ppm for propanol, isobutanol, then you need to worry about them. Similarly, for aldehyde, if you get the concentration less than 10 ppm, you have to worry about them. But if you get higher concentration of this intermediate, then you do further processing, like further purification or further downstream processing to get rid of them. Hydrogen sulfide is also another important factor, because in anaerobic condition, there is a tendency to form hydrogen sulfide due to enzyme breakdown of cysteine. So cysteine as well as methionine, they have sulfur moieties. So cysteine cysteine, cysteine, and methionine, they have sulfur. So during their breakdown, they can produce hydrogen sulfide. So if you have lot of cysteine and methionine degradation, because as I mentioned, wood has significant importance. So what kind of composition you have in the wood, that will actually give you a different kind of fermentation option. So if you get a lot of cysteine and methionine in the wood, then you will end up by getting a lot of H2S production. And that H2S can be removed by CO2. Because if you just purge CO2, the residual H2S will actually go out from the system. And the CO2, whatever you get from the primary fermentation, that CO2 you can collect and you can use it for this purging operation. So CO2 can be purged to remove the H2S, because that will actually create problem with the taste as well as the color also. Now,
Sir, can you please explain again how can the sparging of CO2 will help us removing this H2S?
okay, in the liquid you have gas. Okay.
Yes, sir.
In the liquid you have gas. Now they are not completely soluble here because you are maintaining really relatively low pH. So liquid will have some gas hold up. Now you keep on sending a different gas. So obviously the dynamics of the liquid will change. So the gas you are sending from outside, they will try to replace the gas present in the liquid, and slowly it will get saturated with the carbon dioxide, and it will try to remove the gas present in the liquid. So if H2S is present in the liquid and you start supplying carbon dioxide, due course of time, the entire liquid will try to get saturated with carbon dioxide by replacing H2S. So H2S will actually get stripped off from the system, with the help of carbon dioxide.
Yes, sir. Understood.
Now, one important factor is it is quite unpleasant for beer, because most of the people, they don't try to have buttery flavor in beer, and it is very common in US. In US industry, they don't prefer to get any buttery flavor. So butter has some unique taste. So they don't want to have buttery flavor in the beer. So this diacetyl is one compound, is also known as vicinal diketones. So diacetyl is not very pleasant, and that can actually form during this fermentation, because during yeast cell metabolism from pyruvic acid, diacetyl is formed due to oxidative decarboxylation of alpha acetolactic acid. So in yeast pyruvic acid metabolism, during this alpha so during pyruvic acid metabolism in yeast, alpha acetolactic acid will get converted to diacetyl due to this during oxidative decarboxylation. So this particular decarboxylation rate will always increase due to increase in temperature and decrease in pH. So in the fermentation reaction, if you don't have proper mixing or heat dissipation, you will have hot spot creation. So this diacetyl formation will actually increase in diacetyl concentration due to increase in temperature and decrease in pH. So decrease in pH and increase in temperature, you will have formation of diacetyl. Now, this can be assimilated by yeast to produce butanediol or acetone, which are not very easily detected in beer, because it is not very common to get in the beer. So the utilization of diacetyl by yeast to produce butanediol or acetone is not very common. So essentially, we'll have presence of this diacetyl, and that can give really a different kind of flavor, which is not very desired. So if you have diacetyl, only option is you just prolong the secondary fermentation. So you just give the yeast to more time so they can actually assimilate the diacetyl, and then they will actually get converted to butanediol or acetone. So it can get converted to 2,3-butanediol or acetone. and then you just do further processing to get the clear, or you can say acceptable BA. So in the next class, we'll just discuss about packaging and different processes to stabilize beer, and then we'll start discussing about wine manufacturing. Anybody has any question on this?
No, sir, none currently.
Okay.
Sir, I had a question. Sir, like you mentioned that yeasts are anaerobic and aerobic. So in the beginning, we have aerobic fermentation. So, sir, uh, is aerobic fermentation more beneficial or anaerobic in the beginning? What will be like better? Like
No,
for increasing biomass, we want to increase the biomass fastly in the beginning.
yeah. So in the beginning, you want to get little bit high concentration of biomass. That's why we don't displace the oxygen by purging nitrogen. So deliberately, we try to have a little bit of aerobic respiration. So essentially, obviously, we'll be losing certain amount of carbon for doing that, but it will also save preparing the inoculum, because you are adding only say 15 million per ml. Now, if you do spend little bit of time for aerobic fermentation, you will get 3 to 4 fold increase of biomass concentration. So you started with 15 million, you end up by getting 60 million cells per ml. So that is also another major advantage if you don't purge any nitrogen or any other gases to make it anaerobic. And for that operation, you just spend maybe maximum 5 days, and after 5 days, you just wait for another, means you just wait for 10 to 12 days to complete the fermentation. And in this process, as I mentioned, multiple options are there. Means if you have a really very prolonged uh, aerobic respiration, then you can get formation of different other uh, chemicals which are not desired, undesired chemicals. So most of the industry, they follow these steps blindly. Like for them, it is, these are all thumb rules. They should not deviate from this uh, time and temperature cycle. So, but even if you have some changes in time and temperature cycle, you may end up by getting different compounds. So this description, whatever I mentioned, when you go to any industry, they may not ask you to know all these internal details, but I explain them because it will actually help you to understand what kind of compositional change you can expect if you have any variation in time and temperature cycle.
Yes, sir. Also, sir, you mentioned that 1 to 2 pound of yeast is used for every
Per barrel
barrel of wood.
code,
So
yeah.
again, that converts to like
That will
five.
actually, that will give you at least 15 million per ml, 15 million cells per ml.
Okay, sir. So that is enough for.
That is the pitching concentration or seed inoculum concentration. But obviously, after initial aerobic stage, you end up by getting almost 4-fold concentration increase. So you'll get say 60 million per ml.
Okay, sir. Sir, again, one more thing. Like you mentioned, dextrose and tetrose. So these are the sugars. So from where do we get that into our fermentation?
So when you start preparing the oat, you have two different things. One is malt. You start with malt. Malt mostly will give you a lot of proteinaceous material, and also you use adjunct. Adjunct is actually corn grit or rice grit that will give a lot of sugar, carbohydrate. Now, in the oat preparation process, you actually hydrolyze proteinaceous material and also the carbohydrates. So the sugars are actually coming from the adjunct or carbohydrate, and some amount of sugar will also come from the malt. and that will actually happen during mashing process as well as port preparation process. Now, whatever carbon you get during mashing process, if you do rapid temperature increase, you will get non-fermentative sugar. If you get slow increase in temperature, you will get more fermentative sugar. And that's why in the last class, I did mention about oat manufacturing process, but didn't give much on mashing because mashing has a lot of relation with fermentation. That's why today actually I first started with mashing and then we mention about fermentation. So mashing has significant impact to get fermentable sugars.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So we'll again meet on Friday.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.